Nathan. Where are you? We need to talk, my wife called out as she came through the front door. I could hear that she was not alone. She knew I was home because my car was sitting in the driveway. I'm upstairs. I'll be down in a minute, I called out as I was shutting the suitcase lying on the bed. What are you doing at home already? She asked as she walked into the bedroom. And why are you packing a suitcase? Oh, I had a call from a prospective client. It's kind of a rush issue, so I left work to pack. I need to catch my flight in a couple of hours. Sorry for not telling you, but the opportunity just came up. I need to strike quickly before it's too late. Oh, okay. Anyway, I hope you have a few minutes because I really need to talk to you. Sure, no problem. I have a little time, I replied, picking up my suitcase and following behind her. We went into the kitchen to sit at the table. Sure enough, there was another guy there. I recognized him. It was Dave Knowlton, one of the lawyers at the firm she worked for. I grabbed a cup of coffee that I had brewed about half an hour ago and sat down. Well, Nathan, there's really no easy way to say this, so I'll just be blunt. Dave and I have fallen in love. I don't love you anymore, and I want a divorce. We have already filed the paperwork, and here is your copy. Okay, well, I can't really fight that. If it's over between us, then it's over. Do you mind if I take a look at this? It's better to just get things over with quickly. Depending on how this trip goes, I might not have much time for the next few months to deal with this. Maybe Dave should have a notary come over so we can just wrap everything up before I leave. Wow, Nathan, you are being very mature about this. I was expecting a big argument. I'm sorry to have hit you from left field on this, but it's best to just get it over with and move on. Well, from what you said, trying to fight it would be futile. So, let's see what we have here. I took a few minutes to review the division of assets. Okay, I see one change that I would like. On spousal support, I'm curious about that. You actually have a decent job. Why are you asking for $2,000 a month? Well, we looked that up and did the math on that. You actually make about 4 times what I make, so the formula that the court uses comes up with that amount. Okay. The only issue I see with that is that things in my company are about to change significantly, and I really don't want to have to go back to court to renegotiate this. How about if we just change it to a fair percentage of my income? Let's do a simple 25%. That actually give you more based on my last paycheck, and it will automatically adjust as my pay changes. Oh, wow. That's very generous of you and good thinking. Okay, Dave will change that, and we will all initial it, she replied. Well, you have given me a great 10 years, so there is no reason not to be fair. Now, about asking for 60% of the business. You really know nothing about running it. I don't want to lose control over it, so how about you just get 49%? In reality, I am the driving force behind it. In fact, to make up for that, we can change the division on the investments from you getting 60% to you getting 80% of all current investments. After all, I can always rebuild what I am losing. Okay, I guess that will work, as long as I can keep the house. I love this house, she replied. I can work with that. In fact, I will be working so much that I won't have time to go to the beach house. I'm not really a beach person anyway. Tell you what, let's change the wording on this to say that I will sign over my share of all the properties that we own now. I'll probably just buy a condo somewhere anyway. Less maintenance on that. Nathan, I can't believe how generous you are being, she answered. Well, as I mentioned, I will be too busy to really enjoy the properties, and I can make enough money to rebuild my portfolio. Okay, now for child support. Personally, I think you are a little low here, and there is no provision to escalate it as my income increases. After all, I want my kids to be well taken care of. Let's change this to say that 25% of all my income in this country goes for child support. That way, it not only covers my income from work, but it will also cover any other income from my investments here. Also, since you will be the custodial parent, they should really be on your insurance. Okay, that sounds reasonable. I'll have David log on to the Wi-Fi and print out the new documents. We can sign and notarize them, then David can take them down to get filed. Thank you, Nathan. You have been very mature about this. I appreciate it. The documents were printed, the notary arrived, and we signed the papers. I picked up my suitcase and left for the airport. It was 1 month later. My ringtone woke me from dozing on the beach in Cabo. I didn't even need to check caller ID to know who it was. Hello, Anna. To what do I owe the pleasure of this call? Was I not generous enough? You bastard! I don't know how you did it, but you won't get away with this. Good thing I answered it on speaker instead of holding the phone to my ear. Why, whatever do you mean, dear? I questioned. You know goddamn good and well what I mean. There's a moving truck sitting in front of the house and a deputy sheriff is here with eviction papers. Well, I would imagine that the owners of the house would need for you and your boyfriend to move out before they can move in. You signed the house over to me. What do you mean by the new owners? I am the owner, she replied angrily. Well, that isn't technically true. What I signed over to you was all property that we owned at the time of the divorce papers being signed. We hadn't actually owned any property for over 3 months before you gave me those divorce papers. Since your name was not on the deeds, I didn't even need your signature to sell them. You mean the beach house too? She asked. I told you that I wasn't really much of a beach person. You bastard! Where the hell are you anyway? I need to meet with you to discuss signing the paperwork so I can take ownership of my share of the company. Yeah, about that. You didn't, she replied. About 6 months ago, I was just managing it for the new owners on salary until they got up to speed. In fact, I completely stopped working there a week before our last talk. Then, that also means, no salary, no maintenance, I shouted. But what about the kids? You said that you wanted to take care of the kids, she questioned. No. What I said is that I wanted to take care of my kids. Since I am not the biological father to either of them, I have no interest in taking care of them. Perhaps you should talk to Chris and Jerry about supporting their kids. DNA is a wonderful thing. Well, at least I have the savings and invest. She stopped talking when I could no longer hold in the laughter. Let me guess, she groaned. That's all gone too. I transferred all of that to the offshore account I set up as soon as I sold the business. Good luck finding any of it. We'll see what the court says about that, she laughed. Good luck with that. I gave you everything exactly as it was outlined in the documents you signed and had notarized. You got 49% of all the businesses I owned at the time we signed the papers. You got all the property we owned at the time we signed the papers. You got your chunk of my income at the time we signed. The child support is exactly 20% of my income in the United States of America. Just because you never checked to see if I still owned a business or any property or actually had any income at that time isn't on me. I never actually said that there was any of that. You are getting exactly what you deserve. What do you mean? I supported you and was your wife for 10 years. I deserve more than nothing. Seriously? You've been cheating on me for at least the last 5 years. As soon as I left, you moved your latest conquest in. You're a cheating woman and you don't deserve squat. Oh, and I filed a suit against your company too. I found out that they have a little morality clause in their employee handbook that prohibits adulterous relationships between coworkers. The videos I sent showing you two in the conference room should ensure that you are both fired as well. Besides, the ethics committee is investigating him because he somehow got a bunch of evidence that he was in a sexual relationship with a client as he was representing her. I understand that he could get disbarred because of that. That would really suck because that would mean he couldn't simply move to another law firm or even open his own firm after he gets fired. Damn! I need to call David! Don't bother. He won't answer, I replied. What do you mean? She questioned. I am led to understand that he was the victim of a rather violent mugging. He's probably in an ambulance being transported to Mercy General right now. It might be time for you to find a new boyfriend. Oh my God! She cried. Nope, not even close. Although the Latina beauty laying next to me right now says the same thing, but it's usually cried out while we are both naked. The call ended shortly after that. My Latina beauty woke from her nap and decided that we needed to go back into the enclosed cabana where we could wear less clothing. I had given her this trip to keep me informed on the status of my wife's activities. She had called me earlier that day to let me know that the papers had been filed and they were going to ambush me that evening. She left the law firm right afterward and went home to pack. We met at the airport and flew to Cabo together. In another 2 days, it was off to Costa Rica, where there is a large expat community, and you can live like a king cheaply. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I know it must say something about my personality. Maybe it's the guilt my parents used to keep me in line as a child. Maybe it was just my nature. All I know is that even as a kid, there were some nights when I would wake up with the most horrible nightmare that I've committed some terrible crime, and it's just a matter of time before they come for me. I knew my guilt. I knew the evidence was out there, and I knew I'd get caught. My heart would race, and I'd sit bolt upright from a dead sleep and struggle to get back to sleep. The funny thing is, I don't have those dreams anymore. When I met my wife, she was sweet and loving, she giggled when I made a joke, and she won my mother over the first time they'd met. We were married for 12 years and all was well those first few years until about 6 months after our first child, a daughter, was born. That was when she began to change. It was gradual at first, and it took years. We had a second child, a son, born 2 years later. That seemed to cement her new personality, and with every passing year, it got worse. She grew ill-tempered with me, and would take sniping shots at the kids. Let's just say that motherhood did not agree with my wife. I tried to talk with her about it more times than I can remember, but those attempts only led to arguments that she would manufacture. I eventually gave up any attempt to fix a marriage broken by forces unknown, and we lived 2 parallel lives. If you asked me what I did to deserve it, I'd be at a loss to answer. She was just an unhappy woman, never satisfied with what she had and always wanting more. As the children grew, she found more reasons to be out of the house. These were her distractions, and they grew more numerous with the passing years. I would get home from work and pass my wife in the hall as she was headed out. "You need to fix dinner. I'm going out." Big surprise. It got so that I viewed those words as a gift. The nights she went out were calm in the house. It was the nights she stayed in that I resented. I fixed most dinners and I did the food shopping. I knew what was in the fridge and I planned the week's meals. As the children grew older, they gravitated toward me as I became both mother and father to them both. You know, that's just not right. A father hopes his children will be happy to greet him when he gets home, but he knows that their mother is the center of their little lives. My kids seemed to hide in their rooms until I got home and then would burst forth to play with their dad. I felt I didn't know her anymore. Her mother had cheated on her father and turned her betrayal into a lifestyle. My wife saw what it did to him. His wife threatened to take the kids away, so he stayed, and he suffered until they went off to college, and then he left. My wife saw the pain that her mother's betrayal caused and swore she would never become her mother. That was another vow broken. The beginning of the end arrived one night in late March. The kids were in bed, and my wife came into the living room to utter those words that have made the blood of husbands turn cold for generations. "David, we need to talk." She didn't even call me honey. Like a school teacher instructing a wayward child, she explained to me that she would start spending her nights with her lover. It came as no news to me, and as with her nights out, I accepted the news with relief. In my wife's case, less was definitely more. I had long ago taken to sleeping in the guest room, and her absence would only make our lives less stressful. At first, I thought she took my acceptance as a victory, but before she left the room, I thought I detected a note of disappointment. Was she trying to inflict pain? Did she want me to beg her not to stray? To my thinking, she was just admitting what I had long known, and like her father, I was staying for my children until they were raised and out of the house. The next few months established the new normal, and my children never even asked where their mother was. Had she told them? I doubt it. I think they were as relieved as me. Spring came, and I began the usual chores that come with warm weather. We spent a Saturday, my children and I, doing the spring cleaning, airing out the house, dusting and polishing. My wife had now begun to spend weekends away, which was a decision that I embraced. My 2 children worked hard that day, and I was as proud of them as a parent could be. We celebrated our hard work that night with cheeseburgers and root beer floats. In the weeks after that, I did the things that the children were too young to do. I rehung a shutter that a windstorm had torn from the house. With the windows now open in the warm spring air, I repainted the living and dining rooms along with the entryway. I replaced exterior trim boards that were losing their battle to rot and replaced some weather stripping that was past its prime. Together, we prepared the garden for summer. We had become a family of 3. I do try to maintain the house myself as best I can, but there are some tasks I do not do. I bring in professionals to clean the furnace every fall, and I have the septic truck drain the septic tank every spring. That has got to be the worst job on the planet. They dig up a bit of sod to uncover the lid, and then they lower that big hose into the tank of filth until they suck it dry. Even on my worst day on the job, I have a better day than that. They do a fairly good job of restoring the patch of yard where they dig out the septic lid, but you can still see the dirt and mangled sod for a few weeks after. It was the following Friday night. I knew the kids were with their grandparents for the weekend. I had long ago informed my parents of my wife's activities, and they felt it their job to give the grandchildren the occasional weekend of fun as their way of making sure the kids felt loved. My children adored their grandparents. I came home with carry-out expecting an empty house and a quiet evening, but I was met with something very different. In the living room sat my wife and her latest distraction. She was flaunting her affair, and he was drinking my good scotch. I didn't give a damn about the affair, but the scotch irritated me. I stood before them as she giggled and he snickered, and then the lecture began. He was spending the weekend, and they would be sleeping in what had once been our bed. She explained that I could watch if I wanted, and for some reason, she found that to be terribly funny. It finally occurred to me as she spoke that it seemed she had a need to systematically escalate her betrayal year after year, as if she no longer got a thrill from any existing attempts to belittle me and needed to find new and more exciting ways to destroy me. I wondered where this would lead, as if the question posed some abstract academic exercise. I felt nothing for her and little to no pain from her betrayal, but I wondered what I would need to do to protect my children. I said nothing. I suppose she thought that I was speechless, rendered submissive and surprised by the depth of her depravity, but the truth is that I was trying to decide whether I gave a damn. I had long ago accepted that the woman I'd married was dead. She stood, dropped her dress in front of me to reveal her naked form, and then walked laughingly up the stairs to her bedroom. He walked alongside her and snatched my dinner from my hand. I suppose at that moment I was a wimp, but I had come to find both her and her companions to be so far beyond contempt that they were not worth the effort of confronting them. At least I would have ignored them had he not done one more thing that was too much for me to ignore. He struck me as he walked by. He laughed, and a switch inside me was thrown. I've looked back on that moment many times and wondered why I let that one act change everything. I didn't care if he had an affair with my wife. She was nothing to me. She was already someone I no longer respected. He could even take my dinner. I'd go out, instead, and spend the weekend with my children. But the slap was the last straw. I sat in a chair, and I planned. I listened to their first round, and I'm sure they were deliberate in their groans and screams. It was all for my benefit and presumed humiliation. I continued to plan as the sun went down. I had a bat by the door. It would be swift and quiet. They started in on round 2. Unsatisfied by my lack of response, they were even louder. I refined my plans. I had plastic sheets from the garage that I used for painting clothes, and old cloth sheets that I used to absorb the small splatters of paint. I knew I could be almost guaranteed secrecy tonight. The moon was down and the sky was overcast. Without starlight, and if I kept the house lights off, I could work in the dark. With a shovel from the garage and the lovers suitably distracted, I removed the sod, taking care to keep it as intact as possible. Then I dug through the earth and opened the septic tank. Round 3 started well after midnight. With the sound of their exaggerated passions masking my efforts, I got the bat by the door and tested my overhead swing so as not to strike the ceiling. When I was ready, I made my way up the stairs and down the hall to her bedroom. Without warning, I struck him in the back of the head, slamming his head into hers. He was out, and she was moaning a very different tune from just seconds ago. A second overhead swing, and she was quiet. I was lucky. I had not cracked their skulls, but had just knocked them unconscious. I bound their hands and feet with zip ties, although they never regained consciousness, as I worked quickly to complete my task. I was committed now. One at a time, I carried them outside. I took him first. With his head hanging over the open tank, I ended his life and slipped him into the filth with more of a thud than a splash. She was second, and for a moment I hesitated. My mind was awash with memories of the woman I fell in love with, of dating, and the night I proposed. I remembered standing together before God and family as we took our vows, and then I ended her life and cast her into the darkness with her lover. Last, I dropped the knife into the tank, rather than risk not being able to clean the blood from the hinge or the blade. I closed the tank, shoveled the dirt over the lid, and placed the sod with care until the ground appeared as it had before. I didn't trust my shirt to be clean of blood, so I burned it in the fire pit out back. I showered, washed my clothes, and dressed. With the dirty business behind me, I took a flashlight and began to examine every inch of the bed, hallway, and stairs. Weeks later, I would remember that shovel and the messy business of ending their lives. You always forget something. I found blood on the handle, so I burned the wood and washed the steel in bleach before I threw it in the dump. I had one more task to perform before the sun came up. I got his keys and drove his car to the worst part of town, and I left it there. I walked back and threw the keys into the sewer one at a time, starting about a mile from where I left the car. It was a long walk on a dark night, but I went unnoticed. I was, after all, just another man on a street of faceless men. When the sun came up, I went over the house again. I was lucky. I was very lucky. If I had cracked their skulls, I would probably never have gotten the house clean again. As it was, I never used the plastic sheets. My parents brought the kids home Sunday evening in time for me to prepare dinner for 5. What was it? Why, it was cheeseburgers and root beer floats, of course. My mother commented on my good mood, and I simply said, "I had a free weekend and now my sweethearts are home." My mother asked, "When is she getting home?" Hell if I know. Hell if I care. That was all I said and all that she needed. On Monday, I called in sick and took boxes of her clothes to Goodwill shops in several neighboring towns. I tossed her cosmetics at the public dump inside a bag of kitchen trash and her jewelry inside another bag. That last bit was hard to do, but I figured that is where I could slip up. Besides, I'd stopped giving her jewelry a long time ago, and what I tossed was just more evidence of her many betrayals. I figured it would be a few days before her employer called to ask about her absence. It was 2. I told them that I hadn't heard from her. Then I took the one gift she'd left me, which was the truth, and I went to the police station to fill out a missing persons report. When they questioned me about why I waited so long, I told them the sad story of my wife's long-standing betrayal and how I figured she was just off with her latest distraction. I told them that I hadn't been alarmed until her employer called me. They asked me the name of her current boyfriend, and I just stared at them. I projected my best version of, "You must be a lot dumber," and finally said, "Do you really think that I want to know his name? I decided a long time ago that she had her life and I have mine, and I will divorce the unfaithful woman when my children are grown." I guess they accepted my answer. 2 weeks later, they came to my door and told me that the best they could figure, she ran off with her latest fling. I just nodded, said, "Good riddance," and ended our brief discussion with, "If you do find her, could you warn me?" They seemed to appreciate the joke, and I never saw them again. That was 5 years ago, and they've been 5 of the best years of my life. I waited a year and got a divorce claiming abandonment. The kids asked a few times about their mother, but they seemed content that she was gone and never cried a tear. Yes, I will admit that every time I have the tank sucked, I worry a little, but I guess the flesh rots and the bones stay on the bottom. I do say a little prayer of thanks that they were naked when I disposed of them. The last thing I need is to have a shirt or a pair of pants come up and clog that truck's pump. I'd have a hard time explaining that, unless, of course, the truck's owner is divorced. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to use the toilet. Never have I enjoyed the bathroom as much as I do now, and when I flush the toilet, I picture my gift flowing down the pipe and into the final resting place of my cheating wife and her last distraction. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. As she sashayed into the living room, I could see that her attire was on point. The quintessential little black dress, red-soled Jimmy Choos with a 4-inch heel, and no apparent lines or straps that would indicate even a mild attempt to protect her modesty. Ah, if only it was meant for me to enjoy. I sipped my old-fashioned, the third of the evening, seeking courage as many men in my position do by imbibing the bracing jolt of quality cocktails. I could tell tonight was the night that my spouse, against all odds, would be attempting to force me to go against everything I held dear. I knew, based on the 10 years of our relationship and subsequent marriage, what type of script she would try to follow. "Jimmy, we have to talk." Obviously, she would start with a nickname she knew I hated from middle school onwards. My name is James. Not any other iteration is acceptable to me. This was to denigrate and possibly cause me to revert to the mental state of a smallish boy who, until a massive growth spurt in my sophomore year of high school, was bullied without mercy. This is what happens when you fall in love with a psychologist and then make the mistake of sharing your past experiences. "Easy, lover. Why can't it wait till morning?" I answered. It seems I might have derailed her train of thought. I probably should have been whimpering something along the lines of, "Where do you think you are going, dressed like that?" Conversely, I could just weep softly into my drink. I decided to remain quiescent so as to get this farce back on track. "Don't you want to know where I am going and who I am going with, James?" she questioned. I really threw a curveball past her. She's already reverted to my proper name and ceased the planned attempt at mental cruelty/dominance. "Sorry to disappoint, Livy, but I already know the answer to those 2 questions. It would be pointless to ask you to give me a response to information that I possess currently. That, and I don't care anymore." Her gasp was audible, and she almost seemed to wilt a tad. I'll give her kudos for a quick recovery. She only remained stunned for a few seconds, although to her, I suspect it stretched to an eternity. "Well, little Jimmy, what do you think you know?" she asked. There it was, the return to arrogance and contempt. She was showing her true colors now. "If you must know, Livy, the who is Dan Jenkins. You know, the man you met at that club a little while back? The one where there was no jacket required? The man you danced with almost every slow song against my wishes? The one I warned you about when we finished arguing about your disrespect. The gent who I told you don't let him steal your heart away. Direct hit, Tango 1 down. As to the where, I suspect you plan on spending the night with him, getting to know one another in the biblical sense. If I am off base, please let me know. Again, she rallied. Well, Nosy Parker, don't you think you are superior? Yes, I will be meeting Dan and his lovemaking again tonight. I'm tired of trying to hide it, and you are just going to have to deal with it or... Time to nip this in the bud, as Don Knotts used to say. Or you'll destroy me in the divorce, take half my money that you contributed nothing to, half my company that I built solely through the sweat of my brow, and make sure I end up in an alley homeless while still trying to pay you maintenance as you ride into the sunset with Dan? I finished her sentence. Exactly, you wimp. I spent years wondering what, if anything, I married you for other than the promise of keeping me in fine living. Other than your money, you are mediocre in every way, she answered. I smirked. I may be an average son of man, but I have only really made one poor decision. I allowed you to get a hold of my heart. I know I can't dance, but when it comes to anything that is not related to my former feelings towards you, I tend to skip right over gold and strike platinum. She sneered, adjusted her wrap, and made a motion toward the door. I cleared my throat. You might want to discuss this a bit further, Livy. Anyway, you can't hurry, love, so a few moments longer won't prevent you from throwing it all away. Clearly annoyed, she spun back towards me. There's nothing left to say, Jimmy. I have you by the root and stem. Either learn to live with it or become a pauper, she answered. Don't rush. Sip your excellent old-fashioned and remain calm. I tell myself this, but I fight against a killing rage and toxic dumps of adrenaline into my system. Livy will likely never know how close I came to resolving this situation in a much more permanent manner before I decided on this path. After 10 years, the least you can do is give me a bit longer before you hurry to Dan and another day in paradise. It won't matter, Jimmy, but if it soothes your little male ego, go ahead, she replied. I sighed. It shows you. Sooner or later, you must answer for every good deed. I have a brief story to tell. You see, your first display with Dan gave me a wake-up call. I knew within a week of your first actual tryst that it was in your eyes. I followed you the second time. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. I knew right at that moment you were dead to me. If you were drowning, I would not lend a hand. That was months ago, she scoffed. You're either more of a wimp than I thought, or you actually have been getting off on the lewdness of the affair, you little deviant. I continued. There's a third option, Brainiac. I knew there was no way out, at least not without very unpleasant consequences. So I decided to put together a plan. Not a 5-year one like the old USSR, but an abbreviated 5-month version. Fact 1, the divorce courts in our country either favor the woman or they seek to drain both parties of all available assets. So I had to ask myself, do I want a person who plans to destroy me completely for my money to win, or do I want my future ex-wife to get it? Honestly, neither was an acceptable option. Fact 2, in my research I found that if I was willing to burn through the money before our divorce, I could only be held accountable for 2 things. My salary and my retirement, both of which could be leveraged to attempt to keep you or the lawyers in high cotton. Another sip. Composure must be maintained. So I determined to destroy both of our futures, at least in the short term for me. Remember how I persuaded you that we could use corporate tax loopholes to save a massive amount on our taxes if we simply let my business hold the leases on our house and cars? She unconsciously nodded. That was phase 1. Now the corporation owns everything. You own the corporation, Nimrod. I own you, she answered. Jesus wept. How did I fall in love with this creature? Phase 2 was to sell the business, according to... She cut me off. Out came her claws. You jerk wonder, how dare you have done that? Not that it matters, I still get half of the sale price and your retirement. I continued. So far, I've been civil, Livy. Don't interrupt me again or you'll never see Dan. I was unwilling to seek violence on you, but Dan was and is fair game. I guess I wasn't hiding my rage well enough anymore. I could tell my visage had struck fear into her heart, and my voice had given her pause. Now that we are of two minds again, allow me to continue. Clouds, little babies. Think about a yellow rubber duck. Picture a pink golf ball in my mind. I continued. You are mostly correct. Our failed system has chosen to involve itself in matters way beyond its original intended purposes of protecting us from foreign nations and supervising international trade. They have their grubby little paws in everything, looking for the smallest grist to mill. Additionally, both sides want to mandate morality when that should be only decided at the personal level of each individual. They would seek to enrich either themselves or you based on your moral choices while utterly disregarding my moral compass. As I said, I researched this carefully while you were playing both sides. I found that if I could bring myself not to care about my wealth, to throw it away before we filed for divorce, it wouldn't be accountable in the asset division. Of course, I would still be as poor as field mice, but you would get nothing. You lose memo bis punitor delicatum. You get nothing. She actually raised her hand. We've come full circle to grade school. I motioned to go on. But there's still your salary unless you quit working for the company and your retirement, right? She questioned. You are correct. That was phase 3. I sold the business, but I promised to work for them in my old position until just before I was served. My monthly wage is $1. She began wilting to the floor. I continued. As far as my retirement, I took the penalty and cashed it out. Sadly, when I went to visit my old friends in Las Vegas, I lost all of it and more. Now, I owe those friends a tidy sum of money. One day, and may that day never come, they will call upon me for a favor. I couldn't contain my laugh. That or they'll break my legs. Sal may be the closest thing to a sibling I've ever had, but he has to maintain his appearance. I seem to be in a land of confusion. You're telling me that Sal Manila is a mobster? She questioned. Technically, Livy, that was an interruption, but I can understand how it slipped out. Dan almost made some new temporary friends, but let it not be said I have no mercy. An infinitesimal amount remains. Let's not exhaust it just yet. She caught herself this time. So, as we speak, we are actually in debt. To Sal, to the banks, and to the credit cards that have kept us from becoming homeless. You alone carry a debt far greater than mine, but I couldn't let you know our status until the ducks were lined up properly, she answered. That's it, really. You can go if you like. I finished the final steps a few days ago and removed the keylogger that warned me of your plans for today. You'll probably have wondered by now why Dan hasn't called to check up on you. While you were in the shower, I disabled your phone. Couldn't have you recording this, could I? I was scared, to tell the truth. I, too, needed to control this conversation until a certain point, and if you had noticed the issue, it could have thrown my plans in the toilet. I probably shouldn't have worried. The last thing Livy would have worried about tonight was her phone. Assuredly, her mind was more attuned to the prospect of the affair with her lover. I continued. But you didn't, and I thank you. I'll get the paperwork served soon, and I've already made other temporary living accommodations, so you can stay here until the entity that I sold the corporation to has given you the proper eviction notice. The only things remaining here that I give a damn about consist of the clothes I have on, this drink, and the remainder of the bottle of whiskey I made it with. You can keep the sugar and bitters like you. They are easily replaced. What will happen now? She was sobbing. Why? We'll live separate lives. I would say don't lose my number, but Livy? Yes, James, she answered. There it is. My proper name again for the last time it matters as far as she is concerned. Lose my number. We still went to court. Her lawyer, paid for by Dan, tried to finagle maintenance based on my future possible earnings and as seemingly punitive damages for my fiscal maneuvering, but the judge was unwilling to lock the court into trying to enforce something so intangible. He did say that if proof could be shown in the next year that I had obtained gainful employment, her lawyer could resubmit the claim. Fat chance of that. Salmon Inca LLC was more than willing to subsidize my recovery retreat to a villa in Palermo. Addiction to gambling and PTSD from the mental cruelty of my ex is terribly taxing. Officially, a friend of ours owned the facility. Patient population, 1. Lots of pretty nurses and therapists, though. I've always wanted to say a friend of mine or ours like that ever since a fellow diminutive, dark-complexioned lad and I finally stood up against the most hated bully in 9th grade. We both got our clocks cleaned. In our shared agony, however, a bond was initiated that has grown until this day. Oh, side note, maybe don't really beat up a Sicilian's only son. You never know who that Sicilian might be or who he might know. I doubt I could have come out with half or less of my money if it wasn't for Sal. Thanks to a backbeating we shared a decade and a change ago, I retained close to 90%. Not a bad investment if you were mercenary enough to look at it that way. I gave some of it to Sal as a gift. Even if you are like brothers, you let your buddy wet his beak. Again, always wanted to say that. The other amount went to a friend of Sal's. Dan still needed to be punished and re-educated as to what not to do with a clearly married woman. I didn't ask for a permanent resolution, but he will know tonight that I'm going to make it right with a seemingly invisible touch. There will be no misunderstanding that he was throwing it all away when he pursued Livy, not that she trying to hang on long enough to fend him off. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.